All right, whenever
All
you're
right,
ready.
perfect. Well, welcome everyone. This is the class of 2024, the post-match forum. Today we are delighted to have several different fourth-year medical students who just had a successful match. We have incoming residents, I guess you could say, from both surgical and non-surgical specialties. So there should be a pretty good broad viewpoint on what it takes to become a resident. In particular, as a UTRGV medical student. This is a moderated event, so there is a preset list of questions that we will go over today. But if anyone does have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or wait until the end, and then we can certainly address those questions as they come up. But so we can respect everyone's time, we'll hop right into it. I am going to just start off by just asking all of the newly matched fourth year students, congratulations, to just first and foremost, tell us your name, where you're from, kind of a little bit about your undergrad specialty and where you are going for residency.
Hey, oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer from Dallas, Texas. Went to undergrad at UT Arlington, majored in biology, and I'll be attending UTMB for anesthesia.
Hi, everyone. My name's Nazanin. I'm from Houston. I went to UCLA for undergrad where I majored in neuroscience, and then I did a MPH after college at UT School of Public Health. And I'll be going to Baylor College of Medicine for neurology.
Hi everyone, I'm Kevin. I'm from Austin. I went to undergrad at St. Edward's University, which is also in Austin. And I matched orthopedic surgery at the University of Washington.
Great. And we do have a couple other fourth year students that may hop on the call later on, but
Hi.
if not,
Sorry, I was gonna introduce myself, but I was kind of slow.
I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, so my name is Cindy Reyes. I have lived in the Valley since I was 8, but originally from the Philippines. I went to undergrad here in UTRGV, went to medical school here, and I also matched here for psychiatry. So homegrown.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I do apologize, Sydney. Yeah, and we are expecting two other medical students. They may or may not be able to make the call, but if they don't, I think we'd be willing to pass along their email if you're interested in their particular specialty. So I mean, those were great introductions. And like I said, we have a wide variety of both surgical and non-surgical specialties. I think just starting off, if you guys don't mind, talk about, one, how did you come to selecting your specialty, and, gauging one, like your competitiveness for that specialty and like why you chose that specialty, and how did you navigate your like sub-I season and choosing away rotations to correlate with the specialty of choice?
I guess I can start off. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
Go ahead. You can go, Kevin. You got it.
All right. So I guess first off, I guess why interested or why did I go into ortho? So ortho, my older brother has cerebral palsy, and so growing up, I was just kind of always around orthopedists and got to see the positive change that they had on my family. So that's kind of why I got interested in it. When I started med school, like I had that idea in the back of my head, but obviously I hadn't committed to anything. But I'd kind of heard that it was like difficult to get into, so I kind of decided that if I'm interested in that, I wanted to optimize my, I guess, like my grades and like my board scores for that. And then if I changed my mind, then I would be, competitive, and then still be a good applicant for other specialties if I changed my mind during third year or whatever. And then I guess how did I plan my sub-I season? So that's a good question. I think for ortho and I think other surgical subspecialties, away rotations are very important. And so that's something that I definitely wanted to prioritize and kind of wanted to base my whole fourth year schedule off of. Going into fourth year, I didn't really know what kind of program I was interested in. So I didn't know if I wanted to go to like a big academic program versus a community program, versus like maybe like a more like private kind of geared program. So I did 4 away rotations at each one of those like at each like different types of programs in different places in the United States as well, just to kind of get a feel for what I like best. And yeah, ended up kind of figuring out what I liked, what I didn't like, and that's how I kind of gauged where I would apply to, and then how I would rank my ranks as well.
For me, prior to medical school, I took a gap year or almost 2 gap years. And I worked as an anesthesia technician. So I worked in the OR, and that was my first exposure to anesthesia. So I was able to see what they did, and I loved their lifestyle, the procedures that they did. So going into medical school, I always had that in the back of my head, but I still liked other specialties like peds, OB-GYN. So during medical school, I explored those specialties, but then at the end, I ended up thinking that anesthesia is best for me, especially after doing a cardiac anesthesia rotation at Valley Baptist. So that's how I ended up in anesthesia. So for fourth year, the big thing for anesthesia is to do away rotations, especially if you don't have a program at your school. So I applied to multiple ways, didn't get any for some reason. So I had to think of a new strategy. So I ended up doing a sub-I in IM and ICU. I know there's a fellowship for anesthesia called critical care. So I knew that ICU would be something that will catch the eyes of the PDs or APDs. And I love that rotation. It was a great experience. So I was able to do it before submitting ERAS, so they were able to see my grade for that rotation. But for fourth year, I just made sure to do a sub-I that was kind of leaning towards anesthesia. IM, your first year of anesthesia as an intern is going to be IM. So you want to do that anyways. But if you can get an away rotation, that would be perfect. You can get at least 2, that'd be great as well. But for me, I didn't get any, and I was able to kind of, re-strategize and make it work.
Yeah, kind of similarly. So I decided neurology, but I was also kind of between a few other specialties like OB-GYN, IM. So I allowed myself to explore those during third year a lot, but ultimately I think I also had like a personal connection to a family member with Parkinson's. And then one thing that was big for me in deciding on neurology was a physician mentor mentioned to me, pick a specialty that you would be happy reading about and learning about every day. So there are other factors, obviously, like lifestyle and kind of like surgical versus non-surgical, but I do think that at the end of the day, you got to really, not everything, but I want to say like the majority of what you're practicing, you should enjoy learning about it, reading about it, and being up to date on the evidence. As far as fourth year goes, I have to admit that I was still kind of between IM and neurology, sort of second semester of third year. So one thing I ended up doing was, and this is something that's I think more feasible for neurology. I didn't do away rotations. I did a sub-I in critical care on neurointervention at VBMC, and then I did the IM sub-I as well. But I think to anyone applying this year, given the distribution and number of neuro faculty we have right now, I would recommend if you can do an away rotation, like one at a program you're really interested in, it could help a lot. And then if not, I know that the AAN did say that they are trying not to hold that against students because away rotations are kind of expensive and difficult as a medical student to navigate.
Hi, everyone. So for me, I think I can relate to a lot of the people who are going to be first doctors in their family because I didn't really have a lot of medical experience, just primary care possibly. So I didn't really know what I wanted to be. I just I was like, I'm gonna go into medicine. So going into my third year, I was like, well, I'll probably be a pediatrician until I did psychiatry rotation. And I guess my personal experiences too, because I feel like medical school almost like ruined my relationship. So I did couples counseling, I did individual counseling. I like took a year off because of a lot of deaths in my family due to COVID. And it just so happened that my fiance, well, I'm engaged now, but so couples counseling work, but my fiance is a therapist. So that really, all of those experiences molded me to be the person that I am. And I'm really thankful that every single, like, I went into psychiatry as my first rotation, and every other rotation I compared to psychiatry. And everything fell short of that just because I just enjoyed it so much. And I agree with Nazine. Or Nazanin, I'm so sorry. I love your name. It's beautiful. Yeah, if you love reading about it, that's something you should, if you're excited about it, you love reading about it, you love learning about it, that's something you should go into. For me, I just for fun will like watch YouTube videos on psychological techniques and just approaches and ways to talk to people. And that's just so much fun. And I think, you know, it should be a passion. So that's why I chose psychiatry. And for me, choosing to stay in the valley and away rotations, I think for psychiatry, depending on where you are, away rotations can be really important. Especially if you want to go, for example, to Dallas. Like I'll just tell you, my ERAS application is very rural based. If you read my application, and that's probably because I grew up here, and I do have a lot of experience in rural areas. So a lot of the programs that send me interviews were more like the rural based programs. And even, for example, I did an interview in UT Southwestern. It was more for a little rural program. So if you really want to go back to your big cities, or you want to go to a specific place, you should probably do it in a way, but I would say it's not completely necessary, especially if you don't have that much money, but you'll still match somewhere. What was I gonna say? UTRGV loves its own. So if you see the people that match UTRGV, you'll be like, whoa. What else can I say? I think for psychiatry interviews, or I don't know if this is a following question, knowing yourself is super important. They really asked me a lot of questions about how I approach different difficulties that I went through. I think that's a following question. Is that a following question? But anyway, I'll stop there because I might take too long, but there we go.
No, that's great. Very insightful. Thank you. And then Valentine, I see that you joined the call. Thank you for joining and being part of this forum. If you don't mind, if you're okay with just kind of introducing yourself and your background education, and then also tagging on to this most recent topic, we were talking about kind of attacking fourth year and how did you end up selecting the specialty that you chose and choosing the away rotations that you went to.
Yeah, sorry for coming on late. I was in an Uber on the way back to the Airbnb that I'm at. But yeah, so I'm at general surgery. Initially, I came into medical school planning on doing emergency medicine. My background is that of an emergency room nurse. I worked as an ER nurse for about 4 years before medical school. And the transition for me from emergency medicine to general surgery happened when I just decided to shadow between MS1 and MS2. And that's something that I think a lot of first years and second years should really try to do. The way the ERAS process is kind of heading nowadays, you kind of have to know what you want to do earlier on and really set your application up so you're like as successful as possible. Because I feel like every year it just gets more and more competitive. And so, I shadowed some of the trauma surgeons down here in South Texas, and I fell in love. And so going on to the question that you said about away rotations. So the thing about Texas applicants, I think overall, is that there's so many programs in Texas, and people out of state know that people from Texas typically want to stay in Texas. So if you're interested in going somewhere outside of Texas, I think doing an away rotation, maybe not necessarily in the specific place you want to go to, but like I went to Brown, so East Coast, and New England territory. And so like, even though that wasn't anywhere in my application, I didn't get any letters from anybody at Brown because I didn't feel like I needed them, but that was something I was able to speak about whenever I was asked, well, why would you leave Texas? You know, because you're a Texas applicant. You know, and I was just able to verbalize, you know, I did no way rotation to try to get outside of my comfort zone. And yeah.
And thanks for commenting on the letters of recommendation, because that was actually going to be the next question or topic that we were going to talk about. The question is, you know, first and foremost, how did you approach getting your letters of recommendation, whether that be through UTRV or getting those annotation? And when did you start requesting them? If you don't mind, I know that if we can start with Nazanin and then go to Sydney, and then from there.
Yeah, I can get started. So for neurology, my thought was I wanted to have as many neurologists writing letters as possible. So I had four, right, yeah. So I submitted 4 letters. 2 were neurologists, 1 was IM, and then because again, our first year of neurology residency is internal medicine. And then my last one was family medicine. And so my rationale in choosing was kind of like mainly neurologists, but also adjacent fields. I think if you had a good letter from like a psychiatry attending, that would be good too. In terms of asking, I think it really depends on your relationship. Earlier is always better. I think I started bringing it up during the rotation for some, and then for some just like in like the end of 3rd year, I sort of sent my initial point of contact email. And I think because of the size of our school and my relationship, especially with the neurology attendings that was so close, I felt like comfortable giving them a few months or even like 2 months from the starting point of asking, just because they knew me very well. But I think that sometimes it can get a little difficult, like if you're doing a sub-I in September, let's say, and then you submit ERAS at the end of September. So then you kind of have to rush it a bit. But overall, that process went pretty smoothly. I also would offer some advice that I got from, I think one of my attendings, which was, if someone offers to write you a letter, take that. You can always just hold on to that letter on ERAS. Even if you're not sure if you're going to use it, it's always good to have the option. So if someone's like, hey, you know, I really enjoyed working with you. You were a great medical student. I would love to write you a letter. Even if it's maybe not super related to your specialty, I think you should just take it. So yeah.
Okay, so how did I approach?
Sorry, just wanted to make a comment quick. Sorry, Sydney, to cut you off, but for applying to a very competitive surgical subspecialty, for that your plasty, ENT, ortho, or surgery, I think sorry, I'm using my phone. I think the letter special to
Ed, I think you're cutting off a lot.
Okay, sorry. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment on the letters of rec. For surgical subspecialties, the recommendation was to get all of the same specialty, like for example, ENT, ortho, plastics. I don't know if Kevin can comment on that.
Yeah. So I can go right after Sydney if you want. So we can talk about like the ortho specific or like the surgical subspecialty ones.
Okay. So really quick, how did I approach getting letters of rec for psychiatry? So going into 3rd year, psychiatry luckily was my first rotation, and I had this gut feeling that it would be the one that I chose. So I had nothing in my application that said I wanted to do psychiatry, because I was like really I didn't know what I wanted to do. So what I decided early on was I had a research elective, and I was like, I don't know what to do research on. And so I talked to Dr. Amador, and I got into a research project with Dr. Amador and Dr. Tabacoli, who was associate program director, but he left, I believe. But anyway, I got into a project with them, and then we happened to get published. Luckily, I was like, wow, I got published. Anyway, so I would say, if you don't have anything in your application that says you wanted to do this, try to do a research project. You know, Dr. Amador is amazing. And then, ask them. I asked Dr. Amador, I asked Dr. Tabacoli, and then the other people that I asked were the people that really got to know me well, which is going to be your IM faculty. That's what I felt, because you see them a lot every single day. And so I asked Dr. Campo Maldonado and Dr. Laura Garcia. I believe she's program director of the Harlingen, the VBMC IM program. And they are so, so kind. And Dr. Campo, I didn't even work with him so much, but I felt like, kindred spirits. So just like feel out the kindest faculty, and the people I'm telling you, they're just like, you won't go wrong with them. And I think Dr. Campo just wrote me a letter, and he's just so Amador, Campo, and Dr. Garcia, get to know them. That's good advice for me.
Yeah, and I'll follow up. So yeah, Ed's right. For surgical subspecialties, for ortho, for ENT, yeah, they do ask for all the same specialty or the specialty that you're applying to. There was one exception. I think UCSF for ortho required one non-ortho letter, but that was just a very weird exception. I actually asked Dr. Amador for my letter for that one, and he was very nice and obliged. In terms of how I went about asking for them, so I was kind of in a particular or a unique situation. I did a research year last year, and we talk about that too at some later point if people have questions about doing research years. But I had spent a year doing research and kind of clinical activities at this particular hospital that I did my research year at. And so I asked the chief of ortho at the hospital, as well as my main mentor for letters. I felt like over the year they'd got to know me pretty well and could speak to my attributes both academically and research and both clinically, what I showed in clinic and in the OR. So they wrote me letters, and then it's for ortho. I'm pretty sure it's the same for ENT and surgery and maybe some others. Is if you do aways, especially if you do them in July, August, it's recommended that you get one letter or two from those away rotations. So at each one, I did a rotation in July and in August. I just made I set the expectations pretty early on. I was assigned to a specific surgeon that I was gonna be rotating with. I know what the residents know too. I'm hey, I'm really interested in coming to this program, obviously, and would really love to hopefully get a letter at the end of the rotation if it's deemed that I deserve one, basically. So going in, setting the expectation already, they'll kind of know in the back of their head that you're wanting to get something out of it other than just a rotation. They'll also probably pay more attention to you. They'll ask you questions, kind of see what you're thinking to kind of gauge who you are as a person more. And I felt like that was a really good way to kind of go about it. And yeah, those are two letters that I used as well. And yeah, that was kind of the main thing. For ortho specifically, I will say, so we don't have a very big ortho department at UTRGV. So I did ask Dr. Sander, who's the chair of ortho at UTRGV, who kind of has mentored me for a couple of years, to write me a letter for as well. And I kind of sent that one to different places. And something that you'll find out later is that you can send specific letters to different places. So if you have more than 4 or 5 or whatever the limit is, you can kind of strategically plan oh, there's connections at this particular program, so I'll send my letters there versus others and stuff like that.
For me, I had 2 letters from anesthesia, one from IM, and then I had an extra one from Dr. Sander and ortho. When it comes to letters, you really want to gauge how that attending feels about you. So what kind of feedback are you getting? How is your evaluation from that attending? Can they attest to who you are as a person, or attest to your growth as a student, or attest to the fact that you actually like that specialty? If they can't answer those 3 questions, you kind of really have to start second guessing things. For anesthesia specifically, since we don't have a program, like Valentine said, really try to explore things early. So I knew that I wanted to get in contact with attending in Harlingen or Edinburgh. So I asked around and I got in contact with Dr. K, who's an anesthesia attending at Valley Baptist. So I was able to make those connections early. So able to shadow, able to do the rotation during 3rd year for cardiac anesthesia. So you have to explore. If you have a slight inkling of slight thought of joining anesthesia, start asking those questions so you can make those connections early so they can write you a letter. For IM, I also had Dr. Campo. He was amazing. And I knew I would get a great letter from him. And for ortho, I was actually surprised when I worked with Dr. Sander during my surgery rotation. He just mentioned, like in passing, like, I'll write you a letter if you wanted to. And I was like, okay, you can just tell me one time. And so I followed up with him and he actually wrote me a letter. And so after 3rd year, I sent an initial email just reminding them of my experience with them and just what I've done in that rotation and sent them my CV. So by the time I was getting ready for ERAS, I kept on following up so they were able to submit it on time.
And I'll just follow up a little bit from the surgery side. So kind of what Kevin and Ed said earlier. For surgery, you have to get letters from surgeons. Like so many webinars that I had joined, they said the same thing. Like they don't want to hear from people that aren't surgeons. They just want to hear from surgeons at the end of the day. I think the caveat with general surgery is that you don't really need to do away rotations. And like, even if you do away rotations, you don't necessarily need to get letters from really interested in going into that specific institution, or if there's somebody who you feel like you worked extremely well with and their letter is stronger than the letters that you have from your home institution, then by all means get it. But I guess the big difference is that we don't have a home orthopedic surgery program, but we do have a home general surgery program. So 1 month at an away rotation is not gonna manifest anything greater than you would get with a year of like collaborating with your home institution. And so what I did all throughout 3rd year, I would constantly go back to the OR. I would constantly work on different projects with the surgery faculty, and they got to know me really well. They were able to write like so many different things in my letters that when I was interviewing at multiple places, they brought up how great my letters of recommendation were from top to bottom. And if I went to an away rotation and got a letter from like somebody who's a big name in general surgery, I know that it wouldn't really carry the same weight and closeness of the faculty members that we had here at UTRGV.
That's fantastic. I think, the letters of recommendation is obviously a part of your ERAS application, and we'll get into some more details surrounding the ERAS. In particular, the personal statement. The personal statement, it's a big part with the ERAS application being more subjective and kind of to get an insight into who you are as an applicant and as a person that maybe not be reflected on, such as CV lines. And so if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of hear you guys share your experience with preparing your personal statement, and what did you take into consideration, or how did you view your personal statement when it came to the ERAS application. I will start off this question to Ed. And Ed, if you don't mind, I know you joined the call late. Before you start answering this question, if you kind of just tell us a little bit about you, where, what you did before medical school in terms of where you went to school, and if there was any additional things we should know, and then where you are going for residency.
Sure. Can you guys hear me well?
Yeah, we
Okay.
can hear you better.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Brownsville, so like an hour away from McAllen. So I went to school here, UTRGV, for undergrad. I did my undergrad in bioengineering, then proceeded to medical school here as well. And then I decided I actually wanted to do anesthesia at first. So that's why, kind of did a lot of the things Jen was mentioning during my first year and second year. Then, kind of got some exposure to ENT. I really liked it. Towards my second year, third year is kind of really when I consolidated that that's what I wanted to do. And then, I proceeded to work with some great mentors that are unfortunately no longer here. I kind of went through just kind of the same thing that everyone that already mentioned, so I won't repeat it. I worked with them a lot, kind of went out of my way to really be there, kind of like Valentine was mentioning, being in the OR. I really wanted to gain as much exposure as possible because it's one of those fields that unless you're really exposed to it, you don't really know about, and you don't really realize how great it is until you kind of know, and you realize why it's so competitive because it's so cool. So, I kind of went through that. Then I proceeded to get letters of recommendation. I got, well, all my letters of recommendation were from ENTs that were faculty before at the School of Medicine, but are no longer here. So unfortunately, now we were down to one ENT, but the timing worked out for me. So I applied, I got a decent amount of interviews, and I actually interviewed at one of my top I matched at one of my top choices for ENT at the University of Louisville in Kentucky. So. And then I think your question was it about the personal statement, Ryan?
Yeah, that's correct. Just kind of how you went about creating your personal statement and, just, if you can provide any insight on that.
Sure. So, I think starting my fourth year, not starting my fourth year, towards the end of my third year, I started drafting a personal statement. It did include some of the things from before medical school, but not too much. And then I think the biggest advice I could get is to get multiple people to read it. Medical schools to read it. I got my mentors to read it. So it was probably read by a total of close to 12 people. And they provided feedback on my personal statement. Even faculty at Emory, Johns Hopkins, people that I had met throughout medical school, they read it, they gave me their feedback. And then I kind of just consolidated it towards the end into what I really wanted, my story to be. And I feel like it's one of those things that's a bit underrated about your application, but I feel like I wouldn't have gotten as many interviews if it weren't for my personal statement, because I think, the reason why I wanted to do ENT was very powerful. And I think that actually got me a lot more interviews than I was expecting. So don't undermine the personal statement. If you do it right, it could really open a lot of doors for you. And that's all I have to say.
I can go next. So for neurology, I will say that the personal statement's pretty important. They really want to hear about your interest in the field and know that that's something that you've chosen and you're very interested in and you like neurology. So that goes a long way. I think for personal statement, I kind of started brainstorming. One thing I will add is if you are into not sure of what you want to do, a good exercise is to try to write a personal statement about the specialties you're thinking about and see what comes easier. That might be a good little trick. But I think I started brainstorming it at the end of third year, and then honestly I wrote it more in the beginning of fourth year. One thing about your personal statement though I will add is definitely have someone who is good with grammar read over it. The ERAS personal statement, again, underrated, like Ed was saying. It can really give insight into who you are. You want it to be a page. You don't really want to go over a page. And you want it to read, unlike your medical school personal statement, you want it to read a little bit more like you're applying for a job, right? So you want to talk about your interest in the specialty and kind of show how you exhibited that throughout medical school, or your positive qualities that will make you a good doctor, with examples. But ultimately you want to end with kind of this is the type of physician I'm trying to be, and sort of give a little bit of a look into the future. I think they like to see that. But at the same time, you want a little bit of your personality to show through as well.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up. I really agree with everything that Ed said and what Nazi said as well, especially the end with like painting a picture of like who you want to be as a physician in your career. I know especially like a lot of the like higher end programs, like when I interviewed at University of Michigan, that was like a big thing for them, like knowing the trajectory of your career. I know a lot of the times we hear like, you can plan out what subspecialty or like how you want to make your longitudinal career once you get into residency, right? But some of these programs really, like these academic heavy programs, really want to know that you've actually thought about not just, okay, I want to be a physician, not just, okay, I'm interested in surgery, but like what you want to do within the field, because they're planning on like growing leaders in the field. So if you're not coming in with a plan, that's like a telltale sign that you're not really focused on being in a leadership role longitudinally. And then like one of the biggest things when it comes to like molding your personal statement and advice I got from Dr. Alba, the chair of surgery here at UTRGV, is he said, like, look at your CV and look at your personal statement, and it should like mold in a way where you're not repeating things on your CV, but it's not contradictory, right? You don't want to have a CV that is just like basic science research, basic science research, and then you're talking about, I like working with underserved populations and stuff like that, right? That doesn't really make sense. Somebody can think that you're just like trying to milk the system or trying to weasel your way into a certain area just because you think it's like what they want to hear. Your personal statement should really reflect who you are as an applicant, and that coincides with what you've done throughout medical school.
Yeah, going off of that, I was told earlier in third year that, your interview, you want to have an elevator speech, right? And your personal statement basically is an elongated version of your elevator speech. So who you are, what do you value, and why that specialty. So I started working on my personal statement in December. I wrote a bullet point, and then I didn't go back to it till like after third year, if I'm going to be honest. But I know I want to take a creative route because I'm a creative. I like to, read and write and paint, do all that stuff. So I wanted to kind of create a story. And I know that could be like hit or miss for some people. But that's just who I am, So I was able to create a great statement, in my opinion. And I got great feedback from about 2 anesthesiologists, my dad, who's a lawyer, and then also from Melody from the career development, careers in medicine at UTRGV. And I got great feedback. And even at certain programs like Mayo Clinic, they brought up my personal statement. So you can take that risk and be a little bit more creative. That's what I did. If you're scared, don't do it. But I wanted to show who I was. And I think that connected to why anesthesia. So like everyone mentioned, find some good eyes to review your personal statement. Don't be afraid to use the resources that we have at UTRGV that's free. Melody helped me with my personal statement, mock interviews, ERAS. So, don't be afraid to ask questions and reach out for what's already available.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add. Everything that's been said, I agree with. Only a couple more things. Just like one quick tip that I had was that for me, it was like really hard to like sit down on a computer and just write a personal statement. Like I have really bad writer's block. But what would happen randomly is that I would be like driving back home or something, an idea would come in my head, and I'm like, oh, like that sounds great. Like I think that's what I want to put in my personal statement. But if I didn't like write it down or something, I would forget it. And so I would have like my voice memo app on my phone, like as like one of my favorite apps, and I would just like say it, like say what I was thinking in my head. And at the end of like whatever, like a month or two that I had to write my personal statement, I had like all these little like phrases and like things I wanted to include to kind of, be, I guess to kind of, say it better in that specific instance than I would just like trying to write it out. That's just something that helped me. And then second, this might be a little bit extra, but if you are applying to like 2 or 3 programs that like you're very, very interested in, like, like, oh, I want to go to this program, like for sure, it's my number one. you can write multiple personal statements and you can like cater that personal statement to that specific program. That's what I did. I did it for like 2 or 3 programs that I was very interested in. And it was received very well. Like when I was interviewing, they were like, oh, like, I realized that like the last paragraph in your personal statement is like all about reasons why you would be a good fit at this specific program instead of just like any other orthopedic program in the country. And that really stood out. And so I recommend everyone doing that. Maybe not for every single program, depending on how many programs, it could be a lot of writing. But for sure, like your top program, maybe top 2 or 3 would be a good idea.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in. So for the personal statement for psychiatry, that is super important. I feel like psychiatry, how they really assess you, to be a good applicant, board scores are important too, and other things, but they really want to get to know you as a person, just because, I feel like a lot of people may see psychiatry as kind of like that second choice option, or like maybe it's just a lifestyle choice for them. But when in my interviews, I really felt like a lot of the program directors wanted to see the sincerity that the applicant brought to the table. And what came out a lot in my interviews was how I handled a lot of the obstacles that came into my life. And I felt like how I approached my personal statement, because, it's really hard to write about yourself. I did it just like, you know, I think I just like brought out everything that formed me as a person and what molded me to become the person that I am, that would make me a strong applicant. So I thought, oh my God, I have this, my application is not perfect. You could see, oh, this, these things. And I'm like, man, maybe I'm just not, competitive because I'm not perfect applicant. But those imperfections made me a strong applicant. They told me that, because I overcame them. And so, even if right now you're struggling, just keep pushing through and look back on them, and you're going to be a lot stronger than you think, than just that regular applicant. And so that's what, I felt like I had a lot to say, and any question they threw at me, I've already gone through it. So just make sure, confidence is important. But yeah, for personal statement, really, it's not like you're vomiting all your problems out. You still want to just make it seem like I'm strong because I went through it already. That's kind of how I approached it. These are all the things I went through. And, like you're not going to get someone who's as experienced as me because I've gone through it already. Anyway, so how long is it? Okay, so it took me, I don't know, like a week or two. I got Melody to read it. I got my family to read it. I think I got Dr. Amma to read it. But I just wanted it to be authentic. And I didn't get, yeah, that was it. That was all the people. And that was it.
Great, thank you. And so, I mean, after you have gotten your personal statement written, your letters of recommendation, you maybe have gone on an away rotation, third year's behind you, now it's time to submit your actual ERAS application. And, the question that I have for each and every one of you is, one, how many programs did you decide to apply to based on your specialty, and just kind of like making an educated guess there? And then also, how was the interview experience applying into that specialty? And if you don't mind with that, like what were some of the common questions during your interview experience? We could start with Jennifer with this one.
Okay. So for ERAS, going into it, I thought it was going to be extremely daunting and just a big application, scary things. But actually, when you just sit down there, it's not that hard to complete. Just basically just inputting your CV. And if I remember, they have a section for like meaningful experiences. So one little tip is just keep your CV updated. Anything that you do during medical school, put it on there and have someone review it prior to submitting ERAS. But in terms of programs, I knew I wanted to stay in Texas. So Texas was my main state to be in. But I casted a wide net because I heard that it's going to be competitive this year, and it definitely was. But I was looking for a program that would just fit me. So they valued wellness. They valued teaching. I wanted weekly didactics. They valued mentorship, and they valued hands-on experience from intern year in the OR. And I think UTMB for sure stuck out to me because they answered all those 3 questions, or they fit all that criteria. And just the interview itself, they were also welcoming, the faculty, the residents. I love their emphasis on wellness and on learning. They were one of the first programs for anesthesia in the country, so they have a really strong foundation. So I knew that I would be happy there. So just consistently ask yourself, will I be happy here? Don't be moved by name. I mean, I'm speaking for anesthesia, I know surgery is different, but don't be thoroughly moved by name. Just imagine yourself at that institution. Will you be happy? For me, it's gonna be for 4 years. So I knew I wanted to be happy someplace for 4 years. But what was the last question that you mentioned? I think that was mostly it, right?
Yeah, so
Oh,
more so, how many applications did you feel like, so like with anesthesia, how many applications do you feel like an anesthesia applicant should apply to? Because it varies between specialty, and then maybe some of the big heavy hitter questions that
Yeah.
maybe you experienced within that field.
Okay, for anesthesia, since it's getting more competitive, I would say at least 70, apply to at least 70 programs. And so again, just cast a wide net. For interviews, I had a lot of questions about my personal statement and also about my extracurriculars. I've done a lot of volunteer experiences in my church and at UTRGV, so they brought that up a lot. And also my hobbies. There was one interview, we were talking for 20 minutes about karaoke singing and just singing in general. So you'll be surprised. Of course, academics is important. You want to make sure you pass your rotations, get good evals, and pass your courses for sure. But you want to be well-rounded. So you'll be surprised how many people bring up the fact that you do a sports or you just do stuff in your community. So I got a lot of questions about that, just my extracurriculars, who I was as a person, my personal statement, like why did I talk about what I talked about? So just have a general answer for any question that you may receive, whether it's about your experience in medical school, about your extracurriculars. But all in all, I think I had a good interview trail.
I can build on what Jen was saying. I think it was a bit different for me. I think maybe for Kevin as well. I don't know if Kevin also had some in-person interviews. I know ENT for me was mostly in person, like 80% of my interviews were in person. So I had to travel a lot, but I think I got very similar questions. So, about my personal statement. They also ask you like what interests you in ENT, if you want to do a fellowship, what are your career goals, what do you want to do after residency? And I mean, there was questions about anatomy. I mean, I was getting pimped on some of my interviews. So if you want to do a surgical subspecialty, I don't know if Kevin, I think Kevin and Valentine also applied surgery if they were also pimped, but I remember getting pimped on some of my interviews. And I also had to do some technical skills, suturing, knot tying. I mean, I think that's something that if you're going into a surgical subspecialty and you're having in-person interviews, you should be expected to be tested on that, because I mean, overall, if you're going to be a surgeon, you need to be able to do some of these tasks. So I think one of the big things, just like Jen mentioned, that was an advice that was given to me about not just going off by the prestige of the program. I mean, I feel that, some programs, depending on your career goals, they can, be more attractive to you, but overall, you want to be somewhere you'll be happy. So, I mean, I think for me, one of the things I was looking for was a program that had all the subspecialties within ENT be represented. So facial plastics, rhinology, skull-based surgery, allergy and immunology, head and neck surgery. So everything being represented at otology, that was a big thing for me. So I wanted to go to a program that had all of that. I'm not sure if you guys already talked about away rotations, but I think you have to do a really good job if you are going into some of these surgical subspecialties or general surgery. I know Valentine only did one. For general surgery, it's not really the norm to do that many aways, but for something like ortho, ENT, I did 3 away rotations. But in my mind, I kind of wanted to stay in Texas, so I did all of mine in Texas. Maybe if I would have done some out of state, maybe I could have gotten a little bit more interviews. Didn't really ended up hurting me at all. But I think when you're out there, I mean, I know now they're calling them like audition rotations. You really have to be on your A game, because just because you do a rotation there doesn't really guarantee you an interview if you don't do a good job. I mean, you have to be there and be in your A game, and they have to know whether they can work with you, that you're teachable, and that you really know what you're doing. You know, that you're going to be a good resident if you end up matching there. So, and then I think you asked about how many applied. ENT, since we do not have a home program, I applied broadly. You know, actually not having a home program for the specialty you're applying is a bit of a disadvantage if it's a very competitive specialty such as ortho, ENT, plastics. So, you know, I was a bit of a disadvantage there. So I did apply broadly. About 80 to 90 programs is what I applied to. But we also had about 25 signals. So most of your interviews do come from signals. But I mean, I did have a very good amount of programs that interviewed me, even though I didn't signal them. Ryan, was there another question that you asked that I didn't answer?
No, I think that's pretty much it. You did address some of the common questions I asked. I know that is in particular the ENT one. So no, I think that was a very thorough answer. Thank you, Ed.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll follow up on what Ed said. So yeah, ortho, in terms of number of applications, ortho also has signals. I didn't know ENT did. I know OB-GYN does as well. Maybe a couple other specialties do. For ortho, so there's 30 signals in ortho. Last year there was. I think they'll probably keep it the same this far now. I think for that, I applied to 50 programs. All my interviews came from within my 30 signals. Everyone I've talked to on the interview trail, they said they all came from within the 30 signals as well. So maybe a hot take, but I advise anyone who's applying to ortho to just apply to 30 programs, because I don't think the data out there doesn't really say that you'll get much success getting interviews outside of signals. What are signals? Oh, so signals are basically like I don't know if you guys are like young enough or old enough to remember what like pokes were for Facebook. But it's basically just like saying like, I really like you for this program. And it works, I think, a little bit differently for different specialties. Like OB-GYN has like tiered signals. They have like gold and silver signals. And like gold means like you really, really like them. And silver just means you really like them. Kind of weird. But ortho is just 30 signals. They all have the same value. And so that's kind of like one way to kind of differentiate yourself from them. In terms of like my strategy, I made like a list of the programs that I was interested in, and then I asked my mentors what they thought, asked them for their input, and where they suggested I maybe would be a good fit. My reasoning for that was like I really admire my mentors, and I like aspire to be like them, and so anything that they say, I'm gonna like pay attention to and consider. So I asked them. In terms of like common questions, I think you should always be prepared to like answer, like tell me about yourself, why this specialty, and then like other like unique questions that I got were like, tell me about a time that you failed and how like you overcame that. I did actually get like pimped a little bit. There was a couple times where like they showed me like an x-ray and they were like, tell me what you see, how would you treat this? In that case, like you just do the best with what you like, your knowledge you have. Like I don't think anybody expects you to like knock it out of the park. They just kind of want to see how you are under pressure. There was another specific interview too, kind of like Ed, where it was a skills section of it, and they just try to mess with you. Like you're suturing, and they're like moving the table, they're like flashing lights in your face. They just want to see like how you deal under pressure. And it's fun. Just enjoy it. It's cool to get to travel the country. Oh, that too. So I had like about half of my interviews were in person, which I personally prefer. It's really expensive, but you get a way better vibe of the program when you're in person than just online.
And I'll kind of, I guess, just follow up. I posted some things in the chat. So my approach was like very objective. Like I liked looking at the data and what the data shows. And so I knew like last year, the average general surgery applicant applied to 78 programs. So I just told myself, all right, I'm going to apply to 90 programs. Like regardless of, like, I knew I was pretty competitive going in, but I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And I ended up getting way more interviews than I needed. I ended up getting 45 interviews. General surgery has 5 signals, and I got 4 out of my 5 signals. And pretty much the way I gauge which programs I was going to apply to, I made an Excel sheet, and it was probably excessive, but I mean, this is like our future. So we're doing everything that we can do to get to where we want to be. And so like the big thing, like everybody has said with interviews, surgery, you're gonna get pimped. Like they'll be asking you things nonchalantly, like, "Oh, what's your favorite surgery?" And you tell them, and they're gonna be like, "All right, tell me how you do that surgery." You're like, "Huh." And this will be in a room of like 5 to 7 people, and you're just like the one person that everybody's just staring at. So it'll be things like that. When it comes to like the entire ERAS process, Jennifer said something earlier that I really, really, really think that everybody should like take note of is keep your CV up to date. That I think is like a lifesaver. If you can just like, I remember December of third year is when I was like, all right, let me go through all the stuff that I did throughout medical school and just update my CV. And it took way longer than I thought it was going to take. I think it took me like 4 hours to like really itemize every single thing and really make sure it was like fully up to date. And if you wait last minute, you're going to miss a lot of things that are very important when it comes to like your entire application. Things have shifted now where I think before medical students would game the system and try to just join a bunch of organizations. So it looks like they're extremely involved with like everything, even though they may not be super involved, right? But now you're only allowed 10 experiences when it comes to ERAS. So joining a bunch of organizations isn't as beneficial as being involved in organizations. And it goes back to what I said earlier about picking a specialty as early as possible, shadow first year, second year, and then you can really start honing in on your CV and things that you're actually passionate about. I feel like the earlier you do all that, it's easier for you when you're getting ready to not just input yourself into ERAS, but write your personal statement as well. Like you've been passionate about these things, you've been involved in these things, and you're really able to like actually dictate it when you're speaking about yourself on paper. When it comes to the program that I decided to choose, I feel like at the end of the day, name is a big thing, but you also want to be somewhere that you feel like that isn't the only thing. And I remember I interviewed at MGH, and I was like, I remember I was talking to the chair of surgery, and I asked him, so outside of the name, like outside of the Harvard name, what makes you proud to work at this institution? The first thing that he said was, well, the name's important. I'm like, I get that, but that was like the cornerstone of like the entire being of the program. And that's something that kind of rubbed me the wrong way versus the program that I ended up at. The name is there, but then it also is a hospital that's built on serving like the community as a whole, not just those who are affluent. And that's something that aligns extremely well with like what I want to do in my career. And you really have to pay attention to how programs present themselves. Even on Zoom, you still have to pay attention. I'd rather do Zoom than in person just because like I think the money that you save from Zoom interviews I don't think it compares at all, like just for me personally. And there are programs that allow you to do second looks in person. And if there's programs that you're really, really interested in, I think doing those are very valuable.
I can go ahead and I'll try to be brief. So for neurology, my approach to picking programs to apply to and just in general was I looked at the programs themselves, but also I was kind of wanting to stay in Texas, mostly, and I was looking at places I wanted to live. So if there was a program that I just really knew I wouldn't want to live there, I didn't apply. I ended up applying to around 40, less than 50 places, I think, 40 some. And not including prelims, because some of the places had were advanced programs, meaning you have to apply to the intern year separately than the neurology PGY 2, 3, 4 years. In terms of questions, I will echo what everyone else said, like the tell me about yourself is a big one. I think Melody helped me with that a lot, so thank you. But another thing that is underrated is, especially in your third year, do yourself a huge favor and keep a list of meaningful patient interactions you have, meaningful patients you have. Maybe, I know it sounds kind of funny maybe, but like even if you have like a little journal for each rotation, because they will ask you, especially about like for neurology, or I'm sure any of your specialties, like tell me about a meaningful neurology patient you had and what happened. So it's a good idea to like have that on deck. I also got like 1 or 2 pimping questions, but it's not very common for neurology. They'll ask about like why neurology, you know, where do you see yourself after residency? You know, like why our program, or like what do you see as the ideal residency program for you? Things like that I think are more reasonable. And then one kind of out there question I got was about give an example of a time where you feel like you had or showed bias in patient care, or like given it like questions that are maybe like negative toned. And my advice to you all is, if you get those kinds of questions, or like a time you failed, be honest. You know, you want to make yourself look good, but it's okay to be honest as long as you're showing like the end of your answer is something that shows that you learned a lesson. Like, what did you get out of that, and how are you going to improve and do better in the future? Like, what did you learn? So again, don't want to lie and to answer a question, but for sure think about patient interaction and have those.
Okay, I can jump in now. So for psychiatry, I believe you get 5 signals, and I don't know why I say believe, you get 5 signals. And so, but you also get 3 region preferences, and I believe that was more important because I ended up getting many interviews that weren't my signals, but all of them were my region preference. And I applied to 70 programs. I wanted to maximize the amount of chances I got. So in my 3 region preferences, I applied to every single program that was in those regions because, it's, I'm just like, you want to like secure your future. And then I applied to programs that were where my relatives were at, but they were outside my region. But I didn't get any interviews outside any of those regions. Most of my interviews, because of how Texas based my interview was, most of them were Texas, and some of them were surrounding states. So I think if you're going psychiatry, don't waste your time applying outside your region preferences, because I don't know if you'd get an interview unless you do an away rotation and you do like a personalized personal statement for that place, then you'd probably be considered by them. What was my other thing? So how many programs should you apply to if you're going psychiatry? I did 70. I just wanted to maximize, but I think some research says that people only apply to like 40 and still matched. I don't know. I want to, like Valentine, I wanted to increase my chances. And also, I think, yes, so I do agree with the CV thing. What I did was every year, like every time I did something, I put it in my CV because you're gonna forget a lot. And so here are some interview questions. They asked a lot about my personal statement. I wrote about an impactful patient encounter there, and they really asked about that. Hobbies were huge. So I have cats, that came out a lot. I like anime, that came out. And also I know how to cut hair. Like that's my side gig. seriously, I know how to cut hair. And that came up too. So other things that were brought up is I was part of research. So I did like a poster and I did a publication, and they wanted to know what I did with that. Like they didn't just want to be like, oh, your name is on it. Tell me your contribution and summarize it for me. So you have to know that too. If it's on your CV, you have to know that. Also, like if you're in clubs, you can't, I think I would say totally agree. Don't just be in everything. Know what you're passionate about going into medicine and do something impactful with that, because it's stronger when you talk about it. Because if you don't really have a lot to talk about it, then they're just going to be like, oh, not super impressed. Anyway, another thing is they'll bring out interesting things. Like I did a medical mission trip that came out a lot. And just interesting things like the weird stuff that I have cats and cutting hair. Like so many people ask me about that stuff, which cool. What were so there definitely I totally agree with paying attention to the programs that interview you, because there were some programs that were super arrogant, and I felt like they were the big name programs. And I personally, I'm not that arrogant of a person. Like I feel like I'm a pretty humble person, and I'm like, this is not my vibe. Like I would just hate being here. So just know where your personality fits. And if name is important to you and you can survive that climate, then that's good for you. But I know I would probably be miserable because it's not that important to me. And family is the most important to me. And that's why I decided to stay. And I think I answered that question.
That's great. Thank you.
Ryan, I just
Hey,
wanna-
Ryan, really quick. Oh, I was just gonna say, because I forgot that part about like specific, if you guys wanted to know like specific questions, but just I wanted to add on what Sydney was saying, because I mean I interviewed at some programs like in the Northeast, and I remember I was interviewing with a faculty from Boston Children's, and I mean the arrogance was just like out of this world. And I mean I think that it's just something that if it's for you, then I mean go for it. But I think like be prepared to be asked, like, for example, in my research, they wanted me to go line by line on what I did, explain how we started this project, the exact numbers. And I was just like, dude, I'm not gonna go over this. I mean, I was like, I really don't want to be here. I mean, everyone was just so arrogant. And I mean, not saying it was a great program. It's just, I think for the most part, like it's for a certain type of person. But I mean, I think, there's some questions that, I mean, I even got some illegal questions where they can ask you like, how many places did you interview? Where did you interview? Where do you plan to rank us? What is currently your number one? So I think that's something that maybe hasn't been brought up by some of the other people that have spoken, but I definitely got those questions asked to me, like, what's been the top program that you've interviewed? How do you know this person? I mean, I feel like ENT is such a small field that everyone knows each other. So one of the things I forgot to mention is that make sure that the letters of recommendation you get are from people that are academically, involved in the field, because that was one of the best advice I could have gotten. Because otherwise the letters won't weigh. I mean, I think that was one of the best advice I got from my mentor, that, make sure whoever writes you a letter of recommendation for residency, especially in something so competitive, has their name out there in the field, or at least they're in a program that is known. So I think, if I could just, sprinkle in that advice for the letters of rec, and then for the questions, I mean, I think be prepared to answer questions to the level of that program. And I don't know, I think for the most part, maybe Valentine, Kevin, Nazi, Jen, and Sydney will agree, but I felt that the bigger the program, the more they kind of dove into my application and the more personalized the questions were. So I felt that those were the programs where I had the best interviews, because they really thoroughly went through my application and could really ask me very personal questions that, could really, shine light on like who I am as an applicant, and, could really, consolidate why I would be a great applicant or an asset to their institution. So, I mean, I don't know if they would agree, but that's kind of my last take on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Sydney said something about like regional signals. I kind of disagree with doing regional signals if you truly don't have any like regional preference. If your plan is to cast a net as wide as possible, I would not do regional preferences, because like I said earlier, as a Texas applicant, out of state places definitely look at you differently. And so like when I was applying, I did not put any regional preference. I said, you know, I have family all over the country currently, so there's no specific ties that I have to any specific region. And I think that was one of the reasons why I had literally interviews from coast to coast, right? California all the way to New York. So and I think Texas wasn't even the state that I had the most interviews. So
Yeah, I
That's a
put
lot
it in the
of
chat, but I put it in the chat for people who maybe will be seeing this later. For ortho, CORD is like the, I guess, like main, I don't want to say governing body, but like the association for like program directors in the country. The official advice is like, don't put anything for geographic singling, just like leave it blank or put no preference. Unless you like absolutely need to be in a specific place because of family reasons or whatever, just don't put anything. That's for ortho specifically though.
Yeah, it's all fantastic evidence. And I think, you know, we all really appreciate the insight on new, additionally, like how your experiences with interviews, you know, helped facilitate, you know, part of your ranking list and part of your preference. You know, kind of ending tonight's match forum with one of our last questions. You know, we also have a lot of MS1s and MS2s that are attending this call today, and they're still young in their medical school career. And so if you go back to the time that you were a first-year medical student or a second-year medical student, you know, what advice would you give kind of transitioning from a first-year student to a second-year student using that summer? And then also, I'm going to start this question off with Kevin, because Kevin, you also took a research year. And if you don't mind just providing a little bit of insight when it came to your research year and how that helped build your application to what it was.
Sure. And then I think I missed the first question was like, what advice would I give to like first and second years?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So for first and second years, I would say like, especially that first summer between your MS1 and MS2 cycle, do something. I'd say like whether that be shadowing, doing research, doing some volunteering of some sort, like do something that is gonna fulfill you academically, personally, whatever it is that you have interest in. And if you can, try to explore like different specialties that you may be interested in. Me, like personally, I knew I was interested in ortho, so I did research in ortho. I tried to get some shadowing done. During my second and third year, I was also like debating whether or not I want to do anesthesia. So I like shadowed anesthesia a couple times. And so that's what I would say, like, especially early on, like you're at a point where, especially in preclinical years, it doesn't seem like it, but like you do have like some free time if you're disciplined with like your studying. So take advantage of that and explore those opportunities. Another thing I would say for first and second years, step one, I'm old. I took a research year like everyone said. So my step one score was still scored. And it used to be like a lot bigger of a deal, or a lot bigger a deal. Now it's pass fail, which we can debate whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But I think what that's done is it like makes people not care so much about step one. I would say that's like a huge mistake. I would say like study hard for step one. The knowledge that you require for step two, which is still scored currently, builds off directly off of what you know from step one. And it's about learning how to take the test more so, or just as much as, you know, the content itself. So learning how to, answer the questions correctly, like figuring out what they're trying to ask you is huge. And I would say like, take that very seriously. Regarding researchers, it's kind of a big topic in ortho. It's becoming more and more common. It's kind of like a soft like requirement now for a lot of like the big name programs. Like I said, I got involved in research early on during med school. I found out that I really liked it, and I got to meet some really cool mentors at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where I did my research year, who really, kind of told me like the positives of doing a research year, and told me that like, if you're interested in doing any type of academic medicine, this would be like a great year to kind of fully envelop yourself in that specialty and kind of learn as much as you can. So when you come back for fourth year, you'll be, a little bit more comfortable with the material. So I went for it. It worked out for me. I truly like enjoyed my research year. I would do it over again a million times. But it is something that's like kind of a big decision. It is like another year, that maybe like if you think about it financially, like you're losing out on attending pay or whatever. But I see it like you're going to be 33, 34 at the end of training no matter what. So like might as well like do something that's going to, increase your chances of doing something that you really want to do. And especially for ortho, like we don't have a home ortho program. I found it to be like a way to essentially be kind of adopted by another program, and to kind of have mentors who can advocate for you, who can like speak to your strengths, and who can like make phone calls at the end of the day when it comes time to apply, which somebody from UTRGV who is no longer there told me it's not so much about like what you know, it's about who you know. And that's like 100% like right in the small surgical specialties, ortho, ENT, plastics, whatever. I think if you know people who can make phone calls for you, that goes a long way. And I think that research years are a really good way to get those contacts and get that networking started. And if you have an opportunity to do one, I'd say consider it. And again, if you have more questions about that, I'm glad to talk more so offline about that too.
I can build on a little bit what Kevin, talked about. So I matched into ENT, but I didn't do a research year. But it is also becoming more of a norm. I mean, also kind of like a soft, I guess, like, requirement for ENT. I was looking at the numbers, about close to 25% of people that matched into ENT did a research year. Fortunately, I didn't do one because I think, I looked at the data and, the numbers, like Valentine was saying, looking at the data, seeing how competitive you are. One of the things that, I did was sitting down with my mentors. I think it was important because I feel like I'm very realistic when it comes to these things, and, I don't want to play myself. So I sat down with my mentors and I kind of spread it out on the table. I put my application. I said, this is, how much research I've done. This is my step scores. This is how I did on my, grades. So, do I have a shot at, matching into ENT? And they said yes. So, I think having that feedback from them was crucial for me. Otherwise, maybe I would have taken a research year if I needed it. But, I think it also depends, kind of your goals as well, because, if you want to match into like maybe a top program in a, extremely competitive surgical subspecialty like plastic surgery, ENT, orthopedics, then a research year is almost needed. I know there's some programs that only, interview people that either did a research year, away rotation, or signaled them. So, I think it's, something to consider. Now, I honestly, if I was in the situation right now that we're in, maybe with only one ENT, then maybe I would heavily consider a research year. But I think, you have to kind of look at the data. I think that's one of the things, myself and Valentine kind of sat down as well, and we looked, and, we saw like, how competitive we were for our specialty, our, respective specialties. And, I think that really kind of made us stand out because, being from a smaller school with no home program, we don't have AOA, we don't have Gold Humanism, society. I think for some of these top specialties, it's something that they look for as well. So, I think for first and second year, I would say, do well in your classes, make sure you pass your step one on the first try, because, I think, unfortunately, just the direction that we're going, not passing step one on the first try is already a huge red flag, whether we like it or not, because, that's something that already differentiates you from so many other applicants, and they have tons of applications to see. So if they see a red flag on your application, you're already going to automatically be in another pile, unfortunately. So I think being realistic with yourself, I think the first 2 years, I think it's just consolidating your foundation, your knowledge base, doing really well in your classes, step one, then, kind of integrating yourself in whatever specialty you want to go into. I did a internal medicine preceptorship between my first and second year. I was considering anesthesiology, knew I was going to do a medicine intern year. So I kind of wanted to immerse myself in that. got in, I got involved in the interest group, held an airway management session. I was the president of the anesthesia group, then founded the ENT interest group, then kind of worked my way up. I think it's important to take it step by step. You don't want to rush things because, honestly, you can try to do as much research as you want your first and second year, but if you don't pass step one, I mean, it's going to be an uphill battle from there. So I think you really want to focus, at the task at hand. So, taking it step by step, doing well and everything, doing well in your clerkships. I think, overall, I can speak for myself and maybe a couple others that I know that, for the most part, the people that you're seeing here in the panel were very well-rounded applicants. We weren't very one-dimensional. We weren't, just someone that had just outstanding scores. I feel like we do have good scores, right? But, everything else in our application really made us, who we were and allowed us to match into our preferred programs. I think, everyone has something, like Sydney was mentioning, she knows how to cut hair, cats, or so for cats. I play tennis, I did a lot of volunteering. I went to a lot of conferences. So I think every one of us had something that makes us interesting. And it's something that now I think you guys are able to put hobbies and interests on your ERAS application. That's something that we didn't get to do. So I actually put some of my hobbies and my interests in one of my experiences. And, I think that stood out. And you're going to go to a lot of socials. I mean, whether it's virtual or in person, and residents are going to talk to you and you're going to hang out with them. And, if they can't really, there's this thing called like the 3 a.m. test, if they can see themselves working with you at 3 a.m. on a call, then, you're likely going to have a green flag. But if they don't really want to work with you. So what I was told from residents from places I did aways is that they really don't have much say into like, this person is ranked to match, but they have veto power. So, residents can say, we didn't really vibe with this applicant, he's good on paper, but no. So that's kind of the feel that I got. And that was the feedback I got from some of the programs. And, as much as we hate it, things are objective. So, you have to have your step scores. You have to have research for these, surgical subspecialties and a bit more competitive specialties. Otherwise you're just kind of applying with a prayer, and that's not really the position you want to be in, because obviously it's really expensive. Like Kevin was saying, I traveled a lot. I literally got on a plane December 2nd, came back December 20th. That was only half the interviews. Then I had to do it again in January. So you don't want to go through that whole process and not match. So I would say apply once, do it right, and then be real to yourself. Decide whether you need to do a research year, and if that's the specialty you really want to do, then move forward. But I think take it step by step is really the best advice I could give. And make sure to look at those numbers and see where you lie on that bell curve. I mean, if you lie below the bell curve, just know that it's going to be an uphill battle, and I mean, it's not really the place you want to be. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think Ed brings up a good point about being realistic. You want to be able to ask those questions early, explore early. The summer between first and second year, I did a PEDS preceptorship, and I also had a slight interest in radiation oncology. So I worked on a project with someone from Houston. After that summer, I realized I don't like the clinic. So that already eliminates a good amount of specialties for me. And I also realized that I'm not a research girly. So going into second year, I said I wanted to explore more of anesthesia and OB-GYN. So I became an ASA delegate, and also I joined the WIG leadership. So I knew that I wanted to start focusing more on those two specialties, and going to third year and fourth year, I lean more towards anesthesia. So explore early, find your weak points. For step 1 and step 2, if you know that you're not really big on test taking, maybe do a prep course, go to tutoring, find your weak points and try to address them before applying for residency. And my last little nugget, this whole thing can be really daunting and at some points discouraging. But honestly, for me, I'm always optimistic. So there's always hope. I didn't get any away rotations. And I still got plenty of interviews. So as long as you're doing your due diligence, asking those questions, getting connected early, ask, I will give you my contact. I asked for Dee Dee. She's in McGovern doing anesthesia. I asked for her contact because I heard that she matched. So connect with people. What are you going to lose? But don't get discouraged by your journey. It may not be similar to the person next to you, but it's still your journey. So that's my last little nugget.
And then just tying in what Ed and Jennifer just said, make connections early. Like I know Ed has had his mentor since like first, second year of medical school, right? That's a longitudinal connection that he's had. You know, a lot of my mentors, they came from like third year, but even like the trauma surgeon that I like shadowed between MS1 and MS2, I emailed him like a month ago, just telling him thank you, you know? Just like make those connections, but then also follow up with these people because these people want to see you like succeed. They want to see you do well, and it gives them as much joy as it gives you as well, you know? And when it comes to not just making connections with faculty here, right? And mentors you have here, make connections outside of the institution. Ed was talking about going to conferences. Like we went to a bunch of conferences, right? Especially in the field of choice that you're interested in. I met program directors, chairs of surgery at a bunch of big name institutions just because I went to conferences, right? And a lot of these conferences, the medical students tend to not go to, you know, so you going to these conferences puts you in a different light than other people that are applying because there's a certain amount of effort that you're doing that the average person isn't doing. Get involved early. Don't spread yourself thin, but go deep in things that you're interested in and passionate about. Health equity is something that I'm big about, right? So, like if you look at my CV, all my projects are related to health equity, right? Or public policy, right? I was pretty heavily involved in TMA and AMA as well, and all those things tie into how you're going to present yourself in interviews, how you're going to present yourself on paper, not just on your CV, but like when you're writing your personal statement, because your passions feel how somebody sees you and how you honestly see yourself. And then one thing that me and Ed, like we would just sit down at the library and do is we would look at the data. Like at the end of the day, objectively, you have to just look at the data and be honest with yourself. If it says, you know, the 50th percentile for X, Y, and Z, I put the links in the chat for whatever specialty you're interested in. This is what the 50th percentile had. You make sure you get that minimum, you know. But if you're looking at, you know, certain caliber of programs, you want to try to push for that 75th percentile and above, right? To feel comfortable knowing that, okay, you did everything that you could do objectively, right? So that somebody can't say like, oh, because like the one thing I feel like some people like to think about is, you know, we go to a small school in South Texas, you know, but look at all of us that matched extremely well. So that like none of that matters as long as you take care of business. And then the other thing, don't compare yourself to other people, right? I feel like it's easy to get into the trap of like I'm comparing myself to other people. Compare yourself to the data that's there and then use your own personal experience to highlight who you are as an applicant, right? Everybody has pluses and minuses of like their own background, and you want to highlight who you are as an individual. You can't compare yourself to somebody else because at that point you're not an individual. And then the last thing I'll say is don't get lazy. I think a lot of times, especially, you know, MS1, MS2, you're used to being in that didactic environment, you know, coming from undergrad. And then all of a sudden you get in the third year and it's a whole different type of environment. And I've seen people kind of shift where they don't think it's as important, where when third year and fourth year is way more important than MS1 and MS2. And you you look back and you're like, none of the things that I did in MS1, MS2, those quizzes that are worth 0.5% of your grade don't matter at all. So don't get lazy at the end. Like just keep your foot on that gas and push through.
Yeah, I'll just say a few things with regards to standardized or board exams. I'm not that's something that I always struggle with is board exams, but I think my advice, which might be a hot take, is I always try to simulate the exam as much as possible. I think you'll always feel confident going into something you've done before in some way. So like I would try to, like simulate the exam length and time and everything and number of questions and just do as many questions as possible. And then overall, I would say like just reflecting off of what everyone else said, yeah, know yourself, be proud of your accomplishments. Don't forget, because it's easy to forget like how far you've come and how much you've accomplished to get here. Medical students already are such a like high achieving group, and then within that, you've probably done so much more. And if I could just offer a bit of advice, I would say third year is a big like soul searching year where you start to figure out like what you want to do and come to that conclusion. And if you can come to that conclusion sooner rather than later, that's probably in your best interest. I know sometimes you'll have a like I had pediatrics last and I almost like wanted to do pediatrics for a little bit. But yeah, just try to figure that out and um, learn more about who you are and like what you want for your career as soon as you can.
Hey, Brian, I have one last take. I mean, I know, we talked about like I'll resonate what Nazi said, Valentine. One last thing I think that, really went a long way for me and hopefully for some of the others that are here, I think is to be collaborative with your class. I think I work with Jennifer on a project, I work with Valentine. I think, for the most part, isolating yourself from the class and being this so-called like gunner is not really going to take you anywhere. Jen presented one of our projects we did work when, I was interested in anesthesia, Valentine and I both want to do surgery, presented at an endocrine conference. So I think, overall it helps you, it helps others. So why not grow as a class? I think is something so important that, I think if more people could do it, it would benefit not only you, but your class. So I think, those were projects that I got asked about, for example, that anesthesia one was, it had to do with an oral maxillofacial surgery. The endocrine one had to do with the underserved population. So, I know it benefited me. I know hopefully it benefited them, but it's something that really goes a long way. And, if I could give one last piece of advice, it'd be that, be collaborative. I think all of us really want to succeed. And, just from experience, I've seen the people that isolated themselves didn't have, that good of results as, some of us that were a lot more collaborative and really, honed in on trying to help each other out and push ourselves up. So I think that would be like kind of my last piece of advice. Don't really isolate yourself. Medical school is the first 3 years. I guess it's a journey. You got to kind of find yourself, like Nazi was saying. There's a little bit of soul searching. A lot of people switch during third year, what they want to do. But I think if you have a good support system within your school, I think you'll be fine. I think all of us that are here really had one. So that's why we're here.
Also, just real quick, one nugget of advice that I have for people who maybe like rising fourth years is probably more relevant, but fourth year is kind of a blur with all the away rotations and applications and stuff. Everything goes by really fast and you can forget stuff. So I would say like make sure you have somebody you really know who knows you trust. For me, it was my wife. I would call her like almost every day during my rotations, after my interviews, and I would like tell her like take notes of the way I sound. Like, do I sound excited? Do I sound happy? Like tell me like what my vibe is, so that at the end, whenever it's time to make your rank list, they have that input too. Because like whenever like you have like 12 interviews, 13, 15, 16 interviews, like all the programs kind of blend together and you only tend to remember the good things about the programs and not the bad things. And if you have the other person who can like maybe talk about like, well, you sounded like a lot more excited about, program A versus program C or whatever the case may be. That's super valuable and can probably, help you decide how you should rank things too.
Okay, I can go next. Thanks, Brian. Okay, so what is last minute advice I can give for MS1s and MS2s for sure? I would say just because step 1 is not scored, do not take it for granted. I think one of the problems that the school is having right now is there's a lot more failures of step 1 than in the past because students think it's easy. It's not easy. These tests are difficult, okay? They just removed the score because they don't want the psychiatric problems that came with it, right? They wanted to decrease the stress on the students, but definitely it's a possibility to fail, so don't fail. But even if you fail, it's not the end of the world, but don't put that on yourself because it does put you at a lesser, lesser competitiveness. Anyway, so what can I say? I would say from my standpoint is the school does have counseling services, and I would really, give the advice that you guys should go to counseling. I think it really helped me as a person. Just because I'll say this, because a lot of my friends do come to me, and we've had like really deep conversations. A lot of us are really ambitious. We go into medicine, we're all probably super top of the class, valedictorians or salutatorians or whatever we are. We came here and we have all of these ambitions, right? But sometimes we can lose ourselves in our ambition. And then we find ourselves looking at this faraway goal and realizing we got there, but we're not happy. And I have friends who come to me and tell me, hey, I'm so competitive. I'm going to be the surgeon. But Sydney, why are you happy? Why am I not necessarily as happy as you? Right? So I would say that question, it'll save you a lot of heartache if you start in like thinking about yourself now where you are, right? What is actually going to make you happy? And, you know, we have the capability to achieve so much, but will that really fulfill us as a person? I just want to bring that to you guys because there's so many routes we can take in our lives, but there's always a compromise, right? That something will go second, right? So I'll just say the reason why I chose my path in life, and maybe a lot of my experiences would be, I remember starting medicine and my relationship with my partner was so important, but I was having a really difficult time managing everything. So I felt like I was a really bad partner, and I felt like everything else in my life was just, I wasn't that good at those things. And maybe even struggling in med school. So I felt like just bad and horrible at so many things. So I would say counseling really helped me put a lot of things to perspective. And also, it also allowed me to not just support me in the bad moments, but it allowed me to celebrate the little things happening in life. Like, for example, like Valerie or VNA, my counselors, like every week I'd meet them and then we just talk about difficult things, but also if nothing bad was happening, we talk about happy things. And it's really one of those unique experiences where you can just talk for an hour about yourself. And if you're the person that's always prioritizing family, maybe prioritizing your partner, maybe prioritizing your pets, you're just like, you don't know necessarily how to put yourself first. That was my problem, right? I would say try doing counseling because that hour really does make a difference. And as a person, it just makes me so whole and so happy to be able to know how to prioritize myself and my happiness and not feel guilty about it. And just, it also allows me to manage all of my responsibilities in life, not just as a future doctor, but as gonna be a good wife, I'm gonna be a good daughter or a good, friend, stuff like that. It's difficult to manage all those roles, but I would just say we're more than our intelligence and our job. So let's live full lives. And I really want that for all of us. We worked so hard. I really want us to feel that happiness from within. And that's what I would say.
Well, that's some fantastic advice to kind of cap the night on. I mean, this post-match forum has been it's been very insightful, and we can't thank you all enough. I mean, you guys are just a few weeks away from obtaining your MD degree, and there's no doubt in any of us that you guys are going to make UTRGV proud, and we can't thank you enough. And I'll cap this off to Melody to end the event tonight.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. And we did record this session. I'm so happy that you all participated on this panel. Such valuable insight that you all had that I think a lot of our medical students are really going to enjoy this conversation discussion that you all had for tonight. So thank you all so much and congratulations. So we'll see you at graduation.